Part 3 Practicing Strategic Leadership Chapter 6 Integral Strategy, Narratives and Identity in Strategic Leadership. We have defined the broad organizational context in which the strategy will do its work and examined some of the tools and concepts that it needs to become an integrated process of leadership. Ultimately, though, strategic leadership is indispensably a matter of practice. It must enact its designs and use its tools. Part 3 will focus on the practices of a systematic and integrated strategy process. The current chapter opens with a sketch of the elements of strategic leadership as a summary and a prospectus. Then, we turn to the core of our conceptual model by focusing on both the significance and the use of narratives of identity in strategic leadership. Integrating strategy and leadership. We are proposing the formulation of a collaborative process and discipline of strategic leadership. It pretends to be neither a science nor a discrete method of discovering knowledge. Rather, it is an integrative and applied discipline of decision-making. Although different from them, it has parallels with other disciplines of decision-making such as management, which aims to integrate knowledge with decisions and actions. It also has clear similarities with fields like the creative and performing arts and applied psychology. These practical fields use rigorous concepts and systematic methods to engage with human agency and experience, which they intend to influence and enrich but cannot fully objectify and control. As an integrative discipline, strategic leadership relies on interdisciplinary knowledge and insights about leadership and human experience and uses a variety of methods of empirical and conceptual inquiry. As an applied discipline, it uses systematic methods in developing strategies, making decisions, and taking strategic leadership actions. Inherently collaborative, strategic leadership engages participants in group processes and makes decisions through an intentional and structured series of deliberations. As will become clear, the connections between strategy and leadership require careful elaboration. In effect, each of the concepts includes criteria that will set the terms for its relationship in strategic leadership. Since leadership engages humans at deep levels of their experience and motivation, strategy will have to begin there. The idea of integral strategy takes us to organizational self-definition through narratives as the starting point for strategy. Leadership petitions strategic management to find its depths and broaden its vision. The idea of integral strategy also tries to capture the notion that strategic leadership has to be persistently reflective about its own models of thought and judgment. To be adequate to the task, it also must look toward both its connections to legitimate systems of authority and its linkages to methods of implementation. The integration of strategy and leadership involves a series of explicit expectations from the side of strategy as well. The strategy process asks that leadership commit itself to a set of orderly steps and procedures, and to diverse forms of knowledge, analysis, and measurement. Strategy and leadership offer each other disciplined ways of understanding problems and making decisions, and interrelated processes that can mobilize the people and the resources of an organization. The prerequisites of strategic leadership. We have drawn together several streams of reflection on leadership, decision-making, and values in order to set the course for a process of strategic leadership. One way to appropriate the fruits of this labor is by elucidating a set of prerequisites or conditions that must be satisfied for strategic leadership to be an effective practice in the decision-making world of the Academy. Given what we have learned, what tests does strategic leadership have to satisfy? I offer here a series of initial propositions that will be developed, illustrated, and discussed throughout subsequent sections of the text. By offering these motifs here, I hope to provide the reader with both a recapitulation of key findings to date and an outline of the argument and proposed practices that will unfold throughout the text. Strategic leadership is integral. It begins at the level of human agency, values, and paradigms. Sense-making, it relies on narrative to make sense of experience and give meaning to the future. Motivational, it mobilizes energy and commitment. Applied, it takes form in decisions and choices. Collaborative, it uses collegial deliberative methods. Systemic, it connects separate decision-making systems within the organization. Data-driven, it depends on good metrics and strategic indicators. Integral strategy, integrative, it integrates different forms of data and knowledge into insights and decisions. Embedded, it depends on distributed leadership throughout the organization. Action-oriented, it requires effective systems of implementation. The birth of strategy. The power of narratives. Discussions with college administrators about strategic planning quickly reveal how differently people think about the process. The conversation may start as a discussion of the meaning of a vision for a college to be the best in its class, or it might come to focus on the organization's distinctive competencies and its responses to a threatening environment. Frequently the most energy about strategy surrounds questions of financial resources and the college's market position in enrollment, especially its net tuition income after discounts for financial aid and scholarships. All these issues may be critically important, but in themselves they are straight keys of management, not of leadership. How can this strategic focus be shifted to leadership? How can the language of strategy be translated into the idiom of leadership? The answer begins by locating the foundation of strategy in the organization's unique identity, as revealed in its narrative of identity, its story. For our purposes, narrative is the form that stories take as they tell of events that unfold through time and create dramatic tension around conflicts and challenges and their resolution. H. Gardner, 2004. Narratives are the way we tell, and story what we tell, so often the two are one and the same. Narratives of identity are one type of story that give an account of an organization's or society's unique characteristics. This point of departure moves strategy to a deeper plane of self-analysis and self-understanding, where we begin to see that it has to do with sense-making and sense-giving, and so with leadership. For the past several generations, the modern imagination has been drawn to the importance of narrative in understanding human experience. Most contemporary fields in the humanities and social sciences have been fascinated, even preoccupied, with the significance of narratives. The literature on the topic in each discipline is so vast that it represents the shape of the modern sensibility. One far from being seen as simply fanciful inventions, stories are narratives of the meaning of events as persons and groups live them rather than objectify them. Thus we find that case histories and case studies, original historical texts and documents, myths and sagas, songs and dances, paintings and sculpture, biographies and autobiographies, letters and diaries, and novels, poetry, and plays are powerful sources of revelation of the meaning of the human project. As Roland Barthes, one of the most influential theorists on narratives, puts it, under this almost infinite number of forms, the narrative is present at all times, in all places, in all societies. There does not exist, and never has existed, a people without narratives, quoted in Polkinghorne 1988, 14. Stories as people live them or imagine them give us access to the participants' sense of meaning, to human interiority as the individuals or the groups lived forms strategic leadership of self-awareness. Through the meaning of the events that they recount, narratives display values and commitments that matter decisively to people, often with an unqualified sense of importance. Objectified external analyses typically lose sight of the richness and ambiguity of human intention and motivation, and the drama of personal meaning in both ordinary and extraordinary events. Objectification cuts the vital nerve of connection to the self's or the group's investment in these events, their caring about them. Stories, on the other hand, convey the sense of meaning and of mattering with which persons live their lives. Neil Postman captures precisely these motifs. Our genius lies in our capacity to make meaning through the creation of narratives that give point to our labors, exalt our history, elucidate the present, and give direction to our future, quoted in Connor 2004, 10. Stories capture and convey the dynamic of values as the internalized norms of self-enactment. After reminding us that humans are always in the pursuit of what they take to be good, Charles Taylor notes that as we determine the direction of our lives, we must inescapably understand our lives in narrative form, as a quest, 1989, 51-52. Narratives as a distinctive form of cognition. Human intelligence grasps the truths of stories, identifies with them, and remembers them in ways that cannot be matched by abstractions. Ask any teacher or speaker what people remember in their talks. Stories appear to constitute a distinctive cognitive form. This appears to be so pervasively true that many scholars have suggested that the human mind is first and foremost a vehicle for storytelling, claims Dan McAdams, 1993, 28. Just as there are structures to knowledge, so too there are forms and patterns in the search for meaning in our lives. The noted psychologist Jerome Bruner argues that the mind apprehends the world by way of two different cognitive forms, each with its own radically different methods of verification. The paradigmatic mode is logical, empirical, and analytical, while the narrative mode is concerned with wants, needs, and goals, the vicissitudes of human intention and time. Bruner, quoted in McAdams' 1993, 29. Stories convey the shared meanings of human striving, the intensity of conflict, and the unpredictability of experience. In our finitude, nothing is guaranteed, so we are forever finding and losing our path, often in unexpected ways. Stories are adequate to this inherent tension and uncertainty of human existence in time, since they illuminate the changing meanings of who we are and what we intend to become. Ricker, 1984 to 1986. As Bruner puts it, through narrative we construct, reconstruct, and in some ways reinvent yesterday and tomorrow. Memory and imagination supply and consume each other's wares. 2002, 93. Organizational, cultural, and religious stories. Although works of imaginative literature are significant and powerful forms of narrative, our attention will be focused on organizational stories. The importance integral strategy of narratives has been fully appreciated by students of contemporary organizational culture. We agree with Polkinghorne, the narrative is a basic form of coherence for an organization's realm of meaning, just as it is for an individual's. 1988, 123. As we saw in Chapter 1, along with norms, values, rituals, and symbols, stories play a decisive role in shaping the leadership of organizations. Important aspects of institutional identity can only be communicated in narrative form. The consuming devotion and passionate vision of the founders and leaders of organizations are passed from generation to generation and group to group as stories that define the present, not just the past. Two of the most popular and influential management books of the 1980s and 1990s, In Search of Excellence, by Peters and Waterman, 1982, and The Fifth Discipline, by Senge, 1990, reflect a deep sensitivity to the significance of institutional values and narratives. In The Leader's Guide to Storytelling, Stephen Dunning, 2005, charts the many ways in which business organizations do, can, and should rely on stories in accomplishing many of the tasks of leadership. Stories appear to be the epitome of organizational sense-making and Week's understanding of the concept. Stories ground identity with reflections that select the meaning of past events and are enacted and shared with others as a plausible way to understand ongoing experience. Week, 1991, 1995. Nowhere is the centrality of narratives clearer than in religious traditions. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam recount narratives about how the divine has appeared in certain people, places, and events. Jesus of Nazareth taught primarily through stories and parables and by narrating the impending events that would usher in God's kingdom. Narrative is the basic biblical voice. Borg, 1994. Even in the more conceptual texts of classical Buddhism and Hinduism, stories are nonetheless abundant and indispensable, as in the Hindu devotional text the Bhagavad Gita. The crucial significance of story for leadership is foreshadowed in the ways that religious leaders such as prophets, teachers, and saviors communicate and embody narratives about ultimate meaning. Collegiate stories, as it is for other organizations and institutions, so it is for colleges and universities. Stories fill the campus air. The tales of greater and lesser campus comedies and tragedies of intellectual toil and fulfillment, of academic reward and failure, of intimacy and conflict, are constantly given voice. They always begin in one of the basic forms of narrative with "Remember the time?" From playing fields to the laboratory, in offices, classrooms, and studios, from the stage to the library, every institution creates a wealth of stories in which it displays itself and its values. The prominent alumni are extolled, legendary leaders are honored, distinguished professors are celebrated, and great coaches and teams are remembered. Some academic programs and achievements come to take on iconic status and become normative legacies and markers of identity. All the smaller and larger stories can be drawn together and interpreted as part of an inclusive narrative, for they reveal common beliefs, meanings, commitments, and values that reflect a unique identity. Strategic leadership narratives are never told as raw facts or antiseptic histories, but as the tales of participants. They are always shaped by the drama and tension of conflict, success and failure, triumph and defeat, achievement and frustration, loyalty and betrayal. Cf. Dunning 2005, Toma, Dubrow, and Hartley 2005. The story as a narrative of identity displays the unique characteristics that set the institution apart, and in which it takes pride. The place is recognizable in the fragments of its story because they share in a narrative that makes sense of the parts with reference to a larger whole and temporal sequence. Narratives also reach out for larger stories, so each college interprets and reinterprets itself as participating in the comprehensive narrative of certain traditions, norms, and practices of liberal and professional education and the values of scholarly discovery. Boseman again helps us to understand the connection between local stories and master narratives of education because they share a story that tells of origins and envisions a future, a story that constructs ideals, prescribes rules of conduct, provides a source of authority, and, above all gives a sense of continuity and purpose. Postman, quoted in Connor 2004:10. The story, then, is far more than a history, although it is revealed in history. It lives in multiple recollections, but it is defined in shared memory and in common meanings and values. Although not free from conflicting understandings, its common meanings as a story of identity and its bearing on the future as a narrative of aspiration can be coherently interpreted and widely affirmed. Collegiate sagas. The power of the generic idea of story has been applied to the study of higher education in a variety of ways, so it can be illustrated in several forms. In the distinctive college, Antioch, Reed, and Swarthmore, the distinguished sociologist of higher education Burton Clark, 1970, used the notion of organizational saga to capture the power of the cultural dimensions of experience in formal organisations. As such, a saga is a collective understanding of a unique accomplishment based on historical exploits of a formal organization, offering strong normative bonds within and outside the organization. Believers give loyalty to the organization and take pride and identity from it. B. R. Clark 1991, 46. The concept of saga can be taken as a strong form of what we have called story. Each of the three colleges in Clark's study illustrates different patterns of a saga, although they share many common features. At Reed in 1920, a young president created a new college in the northwest of the United States to be a pure academic community that prized nonconformity. Antioch, on the other hand, was an old institution in slow decline before Arthur Morgan became its president in 1919. Under this bold and charismatic president, the college introduced a novel plan to alternate periods of study and work as part of general education. At Swarthmore, a strong Quaker college responded to the leadership of its gifted and magnetic president, Frank Adelot, to create an honors program inspired by the Oxford model. Although not all institutional stories have the depth and salience of sagas, they all display the characteristics of narratives of identity. Whether it is present in integral strategy strong or weak forms, the institutional story is the starting point for strategy. Those institutions that cannot take possession of their life stories will find the work of strategy and leadership frustrated at every turn. As the Association of Governing Boards of Universities and Colleges 2006 report on the college presidency, the leadership imperative, puts it, only by embracing and building on the institutional saga, can a president span successfully the full range of leadership responsibilities. 12, as one element of what the report calls integral leadership. The story, as we shall see, enriches institutional self-definition through statements of identity, mission, vision, and position, and, as a result, it fuels leadership as a reciprocal process.